Hello and welcome to another episode of Commander Fodder. So we're on Series 1, Episode 3 of the Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper series. So Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper came from the Coldsnap Beyond the Grave precon. Well, anyway, for the theme of this particular series it did. It's obviously cropped up. It comes from Coldsnap. It was also in the one of the precon commander products. But for the theme that we're focusing on for these set of series, it's precon manifestation, if you like, that we're focusing on. So today what we're going to do is we're going to go through the original deck and we're going to pull out the single copies. So I've just put to one side single copies of everything apart from the land that's in this deck, and we're going to just go through it, decide what we want is going to come across. Again, possibly those things might get replaced. Then there's another set of cards which are purely going in as placeholders. I like the idea of what they do, but ultimately there may already be cards in the deck through the toolkits that do what it's already doing, and we don't really want more of that. It might, so that could be a reason. Another reason is that whatever it's doing might not be quite strong enough for the deck in a multiplayer environment. So maybe we want to at some point swap it out with something else that does make more sense. And then finally there's going to be some cards that really don't work at all in this particular build. Maybe they made sense in the original Beyond the Grave deck, but for this they don't. The synergy is not strong enough. So we'll go through this and just talk a little bit about what's coming across, offer up some substitutes where we need to, and maybe do a little lead into the next episode when we get onto the Bash the Binders episode, and sort of just highlight the sort of things I'm maybe looking for in filling in those final slots, or things that maybe we're going to use to swap out with stuff we already have. So just to refresh you what Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper is all about. So 2 black, red, green for 4/3. Whenever another non-token creature, and I stress the non-token bit because obviously it's really important when we're making sure that we select the right things for sacrificing, or we know the limitations of the stuff that we are generating here. Whenever another non-token creature you control is put into a graveyard from play, put a 3/1 black and red-green Graveborn creature token with haste into play. Notice it doesn't get sacrificed at the end of turn, which is really good. It's a 3/1, so it's lopsided. It does make it pretty fragile. Maybe we need to think about ways of pumping black and red creatures. Could be something we need to think about a little further down the line in terms of utility stuff, which doesn't necessarily fit with the theme directly, but is going to protect our stuff. We also need to think about things like Shroud and Hexproof, how we're going to protect Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper. You'll notice there's a number of things in the deck which in some form are similar to Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper, in that they do something when a creature's sacrificed. But in a perfect world we want to try and get Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper into play and keep it into play as long as we can. Gutless Ghoul, 2 and a black, 1, sacrifice a creature, you gain 2 life. So you can see how that would interact with Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper. Notice it would be able to target itself, and notice you don't have to tap it to activate that ability. So that's a nice sack outlet. Use it to sacrifice other creatures, help trigger them. And the sort of creature we could use it to sacrifice is Ashen Ghoul. 3 and a black, it's 3/1, it's got haste, which means it can attack when it comes into play. It doesn't suffer from summoning sickness. And when it gets into the graveyard, and this is the sort of thing we're definitely looking for with creatures we are just going to sack. It would be nice if it was a creature that only had a way of getting back from the graveyard, but also had a nice juicy sacrifice triggered or death triggered, should I say, ability. But it is nice to just have these sort of recursive creatures that keep coming back. So single black, return Ashen Gall from your graveyard to play. Play this ability only during your upkeep and only if 3 or more creature cards are above Ashen Gall. So a bit of a condition there. We've got to be careful if we want this to trigger. We've got to make sure that we do have 3 creature cards above it in order for it to get it back. So that's actually brings in an important point with this deck. As we're going through it, you're going to notice that I don't think this is a beginner's deck, thinking about it. Probably this was a bad choice as a starting Commander Fodder focus for this series, but that's just the way it happens sometimes. And as I've worked with this, I thought, God, there's a lot going to be going on in this deck that you've got to keep tabs on. It is a great deck actually to play, because of that, to play on Magic the Gathering Online, because a lot of your triggers are going to be taken care of. But yeah, can be. I imagine there's lots of complicated interactions potentially that could go on in this deck. What was I going to say? I mentioned about the in here. I don't think it's here on the original token. Oh, here we go. No, we'll do it on this card. Disciple of Tevish Sat, 2 and 2 black. It's a 3/1. So rather like the tokens that the Deathkeeper produces. Tap, target creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And for 4, 2 black, sacrifice Disciple of Tevish Sat. Target creature gets -6/-6 until end of turn. So I quite like having something in the deck that destroys creatures through sapping their power and toughness. Like a wither type effect, I suppose. So it's interesting to put this in the deck. It's quite a high cost to do that. We might come across other cards which do this more efficiently. Also, it sacrifices itself and will generate our trigger on our Deathkeeper. But overall, I think the big problem with this card is it's quite costly. It's 2 and 2 black to get into play. It's only a 3/1. The ability is pretty useful. The 4 and 2 black, that's quite a high cost. We are getting, because of if our Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper is in play, we're getting that triggered. Plus, there's other cards in the deck which may additionally get triggered when we sacrifice, or well, when stuff ends up in the graveyard. So we'll see how that pans out. But at the moment, that's coming across. Gristlegrinner, 4 and a black. It's a 3/3. Whenever a creature is put into graveyard from play, Gristlegrinner gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So useful ability. We're able to pump Gristlegrinner. So when stuff gets sacrificed or killed, notice whenever a creature, so it could be any creature. So a lot of stuff is dying in Commander, useful to have in, but also because we're trying to kill lots of our own stuff, we're going to have that triggered, so that's going to start pumping up. Be nice if it had some sort of evasion on it, but maybe we'll talk about some stuff we could put in to help with that. This is an interesting card, Voidmaw. It's 4 and 2 black. It's like a sort of graveyard filtering going on, but not actually. Is that the correct word for it, really? But the card interferes with the normal, a creature is killed, goes into the graveyard, motion, if you like. It's a 4/5. It's got trample on it, so we'll trample over. If another creature would be put into a graveyard from play, remove it from the game instead. And then there's this second clause: put a card removed from the game with Voidmaw into its owner's graveyard. Voidmaw gets +2/+2 until end of turn. There's another pump effect. So what you're doing, and notice it's again any creature. So in a multiplayer where stuff's dying, this is going to be really interesting. So another creature which will pump on certain conditions. Orcish Healer. So I'm going to talk a bit more about regeneration. we don't really want regeneration in the deck, and I'll explain why in a moment. But it is useful, I think, from a political point of view and a few other reasons, to have a card that gives something else regeneration. I don't want a card which has regeneration ability on it, but I am interested in something that could target something and either remove regeneration or grant it. So Orcish Healer, 2 red, 1/1, creature or cleric, 2 red, target creature can't be regenerated, so you can remove regeneration from another creature. But also it allows you to grant regeneration. A couple of different costs here. There's 2 black and a red. Tap, regenerate target black or red or green creature. Won't do red creatures. And red and 2 green, regenerate target black or green creature. Again, red's not included on this. So I think it's a real interesting political card in a multiplayer game where you could, save someone else's stuff. You can regenerate your own stuff. The only problem with this is you'd only really want to use it when there was something you wanted to save and Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper isn't in play. Maybe Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper is in play, there is a thing you want to save, and the reason you want to save it outweighs the generation of the token from the Deathkeeper. So that sort of regeneration I do want in here where it's able to grant other cards, other creatures regeneration. Orcish Blood Painter, 2 and a red, 2/1, sacrifice a creature, tap, sacrifice a creature. Orcish Blood Painter deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So it's like a conditional pinger. And we might see a few of those. Deepfire Elemental, 4 black red for a 4/4 with XX. 1, destroy target artifact or creature with converted cost X. So it's nice to have scalable destruction in here. This will take care of quite a lot of stuff. It's quite a high cost because it's an XX cost. So if you've got something with, say, 5 mana, you've got to sink 11 mana into this. Now I did notice, I think this card actually was in the original, let me just see if I can find it. Yeah, so it was actually in the commander product for this, where they had Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper as the alternate commander. I'm going to leave that in for this. I am curious as to whether there's a creature with this sort of ability on it, which seemingly would be more efficient. So at the moment you can see we don't have a lot of creatures coming across, and I'll show you I've put some stuff at the back because there's some things I want to talk about which we're going to definitely have to substitute out. We've got Grim Harvest, which is a 4 and a black instant, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. It's nice to have stuff that gets back creatures where they don't have the ability to get themselves back. You'll notice it's got recover on this. So 2 and a black, whenever a creature is put into your graveyard from play, you may pay 2 and a black. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand, otherwise remove this card from the game. So I like this idea of having a card that allows you to recover stuff, but at the same point, excuse the pun, has its own ability to make it replayable if you've got the mana to sink into it. We've got Dark Banishing, 2 and a black, destroy target non-black creature. It can't be regenerated. This is going in at the moment. It's nice to have targeted removal. Maybe there's something in black we could substitute it out which wasn't so specific to non-black creatures, so that it could destroy anything. I like the idea that whatever it targets can't be regenerated, so there's a finality to it. Ideally, if we were going to swap it out, what we would want to find is a black removal spell that basically destroyed any creature and that creature couldn't be regenerated. Krovian Rot, 2 and a black, destroy target creature with power 2 or less. So it's going to get rid of when when you're playing Commander, you'll find there's a lot of small utility creatures that crop up. So this is quite useful in combination with its recovery ability. But again, I'm going to be on the lookout for, is there something similar that maybe has a bit more flexibility about it. But at the moment, this is going to come across. Soulburn, X, 2 red, spend only black and or red mana on X. Soulburn deals X damage to target creature or player. You gain life equal to the damage dealt, but not more than the amount of red spent on X. The player's life total before Soulburn. What's it been on X? Player's life total before Soulburn dealt damage or the creature's toughness. Yeah, so I definitely want like a black or red X spell in here, like something that's scalable, so that you can, sink mana into if you want. Again, there might be other black cards which are a bit more flexible and maybe not so conditional with the mana. Skull Catapult. Now, this is an interesting card. There are other cards that do this cheaper, and the cards that I'm thinking of, there's some enchantments which do similar things, and I'm just going to mention these at the moment. So there's Goblin Bombardment, which was in the original, one of the Commander product, the one where Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper was a sort of secondary commander, if you like. And then there's things like Furnace Celebration and Blood Rites. So there's all this sort of, when you sacrifice a permanent, you may pay this, and if you do, it deals extra damage, or you can just sacrifice a creature for a cost. So they all do similar-ish things. In the case of Goblin Bombardment, you've basically got a ping spell on there. So with Skull Catapult, it's so for 1 you can tap it, sacrifice a creature. Skull Catapult deals 2 damage to target creature or player. On the downside, it's more to cast, but on the upside, it's not mana color dependent. So it's 4 as opposed to 1 and a red, but the gives it more flexibility. So I'm going to bring this across. At the moment, I don't think Goblin Bombardment is technically included in any of the toolkits. Just going to check that. No. So we're going to bring that across, but we might look at other stuff that does a similar thing. Certainly an interesting ability to have, and if we can look at more efficient ways of doing that, or ways that interact, work even better with the Deathkeeper ability, then that's something we should watch out for when we're bashing the binders, so to speak. Casting of Bones, 2 and a black enchant creature. When enchanted creature is put into a graveyard, draw 3 cards, then discard 1 of them. So we're going to need some card draw in here. We have got some card draw in our toolkit already. Doesn't hurt to have more. And but again, we'll just see whether is there something else that's more efficient. I recognise the fact that Aura's on always the best thing in Commander, because you're 2 for 1 in yourself, however you say that. But it does fit in with our theme, and we've got to decide whether 2 and a black and a card, is that an efficient way of getting to draw 3 cards and then discarding 1 of them? Is there a better card that does that? So now we're moving on to our sort of maybes, and the reason why Barb the Sexton is a maybe is we've got a mana rock here, and we might simply be overdoing it on the mana rocks. We've got a number of mana rocks in our universal component for our toolkit. If you want to see the toolkit I'm talking about, then you're going to need to watch the earlier episodes from this series. So that's something that at the moment is sort of on on report. We've also got Cold Steel Heart, which is very similar in many ways to Dark Steel Ingot. So it's cheaper than a Dark Steel Ingot, but it does come into play tapped. Like a Dark Steel Ingot, well, with the Cold Steel Heart you have to choose the colour. With Dark Steel Ingot you don't. It generates 1 mana of any colour to your mana pool, and then Cold Steel Heart, add 1 mana of the chosen colour to your mana pool. So it's another one at the moment I am transferring over, but my suspicions are it's going to come out. The reason why I'm hesitating about this is the deck does need a lot of mana. You can see there's a lot of instances where you would want to have a lot of mana sitting at your disposal because of the various abilities that you might want to trigger in response. Again, that adds to the complexity of the deck, but just something to consider. You know, we're going to make this a very mana heavy deck. How do we do that? And one way is through mana rocks. We've also got some ways of ramping and drawing land, and maybe we might need to include other ways. Another thing we need to think about is these sort of mana speed bumps, things like Dark Ritual. Now, one of the problems I have with Dark Ritual is it's like this one hit. It is very cost effective. You're playing 1 black, you're getting 3 mana back. So you've got 2 mana in total, I suppose, 2 black mana. But it doesn't really fit in with the overall theme of the deck. I was interested. I remembered there was cards that generate mana when they're sacrificed. One is Sek'Kuar Hedonist. It's more to cast. You do get a 2/1 body. Single red, so it does cost something to sack it. And it's 3 red to your mana pool. So it's not black, it's red instead. That obviously fits in quite nicely with some of the conditional cards. There was one here where it was either black or red mana. But again, just something to think about. There is, and I've got to find it, there is a card in an earlier set of Magic, it might be Alliances, where the amount of black mana generated is dependent on the creature you sacrificed. And that looks, if I can sort of track that down when I come to the Bashing the Binders episode, that's definitely something I want to talk about. But at the moment, this is definitely placeholder stuff. I want to look for something which maybe is similar to Sek'Kuar Hedonist, that we can get some extra bangs for our buck going on here that interacts nicely with our Deathkeeper ability. So these are the things that definitely aren't coming across. So let me just move that to one side so I can maybe spread these out. For various reasons, we've got an Insidious Bookworms here. Okay, so when it's put into a graveyard, it does trigger something. You can pay 1 in the black, and if you do, target player discards card at random. The discard doesn't really fit in with the theme of this deck, so not something I want to really entertain. So that's not going across, and we're going to substitute that with something in a moment. I'll explain what. Kajoran Dead. Problem with this is, so it does trigger the sacrifice ability when it comes into play, and there will be some nifty things you could get into with this. I think some real cool interactions, some cool combos. The problem is the particular ability that gets it back into play isn't going to trigger the Deathkeeper ability because it's regenerates. So for single black, you can set up a regeneration shield on it. The problem is, by having that regeneration shield in play, when it dies, if you want to use that term, because the problem is it doesn't really die because it doesn't hit the graveyard. So it's a replacement effect, I suppose. So yeah, it's not so. I'm looking for something like this, which is able to have, I suppose the word I'm looking for is resilience, and it keeps coming back. But we need something that interacts with Deathkeeper, and this isn't it. Like I said, regeneration's nice, but it's more useful, I think, when you have a card that can give something else regeneration. This will be sitting in play, and it will gum up the works early in play. But in a 100-card singleton deck, how often is that going to happen? and once your deck does get up and running, the interactions aren't going to be there. Balduvian Dead, 3 and a black for a 2/3, 2 and a red. Remove a creature card from your graveyard from the game. Put a 3/1 black and red graveyard creature token with haste onto play and sacrifice it end of turn. I think you can see why I don't want this to the deck. The token it produces has haste. You're removing another creature card in the graveyard from your game. If anything, I want creatures in the graveyard so that if I've got other cards that we're going to maybe pull up, that would, I want the cards there. I don't want this card taking them out, so yeah, that's not going to be there. And then Deathspark, single red. Deathspark deals 1 damage to target creature or player. At the beginning of your upkeep, if Deathspark is in your graveyard with a creature card directly above it, you may pay 1. If you do, return Deathspark to your hand. I quite like the idea of a pinger that keeps coming back, and again, the ability to do 1 damage could help with a number of different things here. In effect, you could use it on your own creature to trigger the Deathkeeper. You could, if there's a small utility creature in play, maybe you could use it on that. But again, I don't think that's really worth it, and it doesn't fit in maybe with the overall theme of the deck. So that's coming out. So what am I going to put in? So we've got 3 creatures and a removal spell that keeps coming back, that has the extra utility on it. So again, I'm looking for 3 creatures and something with a bit more utility. So the 3 creatures I'm proposing, I'm going to bring across. We've got a couple of here that came up, I think, last week when we were looking at the aggregate deck. So definitely I want reassembling skeletons in there. 1 and a black, so it's more expensive. Oh no, it isn't actually, sorry. If we were thinking of that as a replacement for, say, the Gajuran Dead, so when it comes into play, that was sacrificing a creature and it regenerated. With this one, nothing happens when it enters the battlefield, but you can get it back. So 1 and a black, return reassembling skeleton from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Another card where that's very similar is Blood-Soaked Champion. So there's a single black, Blood-Soaked Champion can't block, and it's got raid on it. 1 and a black, return Blood-Soaked Champion from graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only if you attack with a creature this turn. So it is conditional, but there is a way of getting that back. So for me, I'm going to sort of take out I've got a couple of choices here. Let's say that they take the place of Gajuran Dead and Balduvian Dead. Then we had this Insidious Bookworms, which I've got a card that I'm going to use, which I want in here, which is going to take its slot. I mean, if I'm trying to suppose keeping with the mana cost, you could argue that the Endless Cockroaches replaces the Balduvian Dead, but ultimately it all comes out the same. We're doing a 3-for-3 swap here, with cards that have similar-ish casting costs. So Endless Cockroaches, 1 and 2 black. When Endless Cockroaches dies, return it to its owner's hand. 1/1. So it costs a bit to recast it, but we can get this back. So those are the 3 that are replacing the 3 that I'm going to take out. In terms of the red burn spell, what I was looking for, I was trying to find a creature where I get something out of sacrificing, and also has burn spell stapled onto it. And I found this. It was actually in a repack that I opened a few weeks ago, which had the Munda Ambush Leader in it. I don't know if you remember that one. And it had a Cinder Elemental in there, and I thought that'd be interesting to see what this would be like in the deck. So it's 3 and a red for 2/2, and then X and a red, sacrifice Cinder Elemental. Cinder Elemental deals X damage to target creature or player. So you're investing extra mana in it. Obviously works better when this comes in later in the game, but also you're also getting a 3/1 token out of it if you've got Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper in play, or something else if you've got another card that triggers when a creature dies. So those are my substitutions from the original ones, and they are going in with that pile there. We've got the 4 cards that we're taking out from our one-offs at the moment, which is there, and that will go back in to my I've got lots of deck boxes here with lots of different stuff. I'm using the different coloured sleeves so I can sort of keep track of what came from where. So, you know, black means it came, well, sorry, the Magic the Gathering one means it came from the original Magic the Gathering, pre-con. Green means that it's green here. Green back means it came from my aggregate deck that I built last week, or was showing you last week, and the red one means that it came from the original Commander product that actually had Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper in it. That's how I'm trying to keep track on all of this. Any other sleeves, like there'll be probably a dark bluish sleeve that'll come up, which might be difficult to tell the difference between that and black, and this, well, maybe, yeah, you can see that on camera. Those are going to be cards, I think, that are going to come across from either you know, going way back, the EDH Commander box store challenge toolkit thing that I put together many years ago, it seems like now, or from a binder or some source like that. As a lead-in for next episode, before I sort of wrap this up, I'm just going to talk about some interesting cards that, you know, I've thought about already. I mentioned, you know, the sort of Goblin Bombardment type enchantments, and the Satire Hedonist as things that I might consider for the deck, depending on the amount of slots left. Other things we need to worry about. If you remember, the toolkit had a piece of, let me find it for you. There we go. So, oh yeah, the toolkit, well, and the deck itself will have pink sleeves on it, or they're not really pink, but you know what I mean. So lots of different colours going on here. Yeah, the Mask of Avacyn. I was looking for, so this is a fairly cheap way of giving a creature hexproof. One of the trouble in Magic is finding artifacts which give shroud or hexproof, and that are reasonably budget. Swiftfoot Boots is another one, although these are about $1 now, floating around there. Lightning Greaves is a lot more expensive, so won't be in the deck. But I'm definitely looking for cards that are going to protect Sek'Kuar when it's in play, and maybe other sacrifice facilitators or triggers. The nice thing with equipment is, of course, you can move it around. There are some enchantments you could use, again, with auras. It's not something that's a good idea to necessarily play in Commander. But there is, I'm trying to think, is it Aspect of the Mongoose, which is a green enchantment aura from, I'm trying to remember the set now. Is it one of the Future Sight sets, I think? And that does have the ability, I think, if the creature's killed, it bounces back to your hand. I might have to check that, but you know, there are a few cards out there where maybe that aren't equipment that are reasonably priced and have a way of protecting our commander, so it doesn't keep getting removed every single time. So that's something else I wanted to think about. And you'll notice that red back that came from that was in the Commander product. Another thing I thought about was I noticed there was a Primal Vigor in there. We're generating 3/1 tokens, and there was somewhere along the line, I noticed when we were pulling out cards and talking about, I think last week's episode when we looked at the aggregate deck build from EDH Rec, I found that there was maybe a counter sub theme going on in there. I'm not too worried about that here, whether this gets triggered or doesn't. I mean, certainly it's a nice way of buffing the creatures up. So if I can slide a token theme in, that would be useful because it stops those 3/1 tokens being so fragile. But Primal Vigor will help with that, and that comes from that commander deck as well, from the one where Sek'Kuar Deathkeeper was a secondary commander. If you want a quick one-shot way of doing that, then we've got Druids Deliverance. It's an instant, it's 1 and a green. It's a fog effect with a populate bolted onto it, and so put a token into the battlefield. That's a copy of a creature token you control, so you don't populate everything. I don't know how useful is that, but if again, you know, in a deck you're thinking about adding some fog effects in here, or we've already got some fog effects in the toolkit, and substituting out with another one which was more, you know, it gave an extra thing, in this case generating another token of the same type that's in play, then that might be a possibility. And then a lot of utility cards that, as I was doing various searches and looking at other of the commander products that I'd opened that might be useful in this deck. So cards that will get stuff back, like Mortuary Mire, and then there's a card out of another commander product, Scourge of Nel Toth, which again has a graveyard interaction where you can get it back from the graveyard by paying 2 black and sacrificing 2 creatures rather than paying its mana cost. That's a 6/6 with flying for 5 and 2 black. We've got Mortician Beetle, so interesting card to have when you've got sacrifices potentially going on in a deck. So single black 1/1. Whenever a player sacrifices a creature, you may put a 1/1 counter on Mortician Beetle. Quest for the Graveyard, something else that interacts with the fact that you're putting stuff in the graveyard. Whenever a creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you may put a quest counter on Quest for the Graveyard. Doesn't care what graveyard the creature is put into. Remove 3 quest counters from Quest for the Graveyard and sacrifice it. Put a 5/5 zombie giant creature token onto the battlefield. What I'm looking for as well here is, the problem with this deck is there's not, yeah, we potentially could have a go wide strategy. I think it's the correct term. You know, we could generate some 3/1 tokens. We would need to have something that would generate a lot of them, and the problem with this deck is it's quite dirtly, and there is a potential issue where you could just be generating a lot of one-offs here and there and nothing really substantial, and slowly wearing your opponent down. So we're definitely going to need some high-end finishers, and there's already some stuff I'm thinking about, and when we look to the Bash the Binders episode, we're definitely going to, you know, explore what we need. I'm looking probably for about 6 you know, more sort of higher mana casting cost creatures that interact in some way with this. Maybe we go down the Devour route, which fits in with the sacrificing. Maybe there's some high-end creatures which are able to do stuff with things that are in the graveyard, but again, that would counteract the fact that we want stuff coming back from the graveyard, really. And talking about coming back from the graveyard, Hell's Caretaker. Sacrifice a creature, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate this ability only during your upkeep. Definitely thought about this card. And then we got Bontu the Glorified. 2 and a black, 4/6 with Menace and Indestructible. Bontu the Glorified can't attack or block unless a creature died under your control this turn. 1 and a black, sacrifice another creature, scry 1. Each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then a couple of, well, one's a land, Springjack Pasture for tap 1 to your mana pool. Pretty straightforward. Actually comes out, I think this one actually does come out of the, maybe I should, just in the interest of, let me check this. I'm trying to remember whether this was actually in the deck as well. Or maybe not. I think it was actually probably in another one of the decks. Anyway, so we've got a utility land here that generates tokens. I thought it would be an amusing thing to do in the deck to be sacrificing goats. 4 tap, put a 0/1 white goat creature token onto the battlefield. Tap, sacrifice X goats, add X mana of any one colour to your mana pool, you gain X life. Obviously, the sacrificing of the tokens, the only problem is it's not going to obviously trigger your Deathkeeper ability, but it might be just a fun thing to do in the deck. And in keeping with that, Trading Post, it's an artifact. 1 tap, discard a card, you gain 4 life. 1 tap, play 1 life, put a 0/1 white goat creature token onto the battlefield. 1 tap, sacrifice a creature, return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. And 1 tap, sacrifice an artifact, draw a card. Okay, so that's some stuff we want to talk about probably next time. Just give you ideas for where you might want to take the deck if you're sort of building your own version. Okay, thanks for watching. Bye for now.